Hello. This episode of the House of Lechmere is going to be all about the Long Island serial killers. A suspect has recently been arrested for those crimes, and I'm going to compare them to the Jack the Ripper crimes, which might surprise many of you, but there's a whole series of comparisons. I will begin by outlining all of the Long Island serial killing murders. I'll do this chronologically with respect to when the murders took place rather than when the bodies were found. The bodies were found in many instances long after the murders took place. It should be emphasised that not all of these murders need necessarily have been by the same perpetrator, yet they've all been linked geographically and in many instances by methodology. The methodology of how the victim was killed and disposed of. Understanding the geography is very important in this type of case, so I've produced several maps to help show how this all links together. The first victim was called Tina Foglia, aged 19, murdered and dismembered on the 1st of February 1982, long before the other murders. The suspect that has been arrested was only about 18 at the time, so this one I'm personally dubious about. The body parts were dumped in garbage bags near Gilgo Beach on the south shore of Long Island. They were found on the 3rd of February 1982. Gilgo Beach is going to recur again and again and again in this case, which is why this murder has been linked. In April 1996, 2 legs were found in a garbage bag on a place called Fire Island, which is on the south shore of Long Island. 15 years later, a skull and some teeth were found at Tobay Beach, very close to where these other bodies were later to be discovered. The skull and teeth were linked to the legs via DNA testing, but the victim has never been identified and is known as Jane Doe number 7. The next took place in June 1997. A torso of a female, a body with no arms and no head and no legs beneath the knee, was found in a park on Long Island called Hempstead Lake State Park. Years later, don't forget this is in 1997, years later in 2011, some skeletal remains linked by DNA to the torso was found on Jones Beach State Park on Long Island, on the south shore of Long Island. Also in 2011, a few miles up from Jones Beach, at Cedar Beach, the remains of a child of roughly 2 years of age was found. DNA testing established that this was the daughter of the female victim. In the absence of the female victim's head or hands to help identify the person, a picture of a distinctive tattoo of a peach that was on her back was circulated. The tattooist who put this tattoo on this lady's back remembered doing it. He came forward and said that she had come to his tattoo parlour accompanied by an aunt and a cousin, and he remembered that she was African American. But even with this extra information of the aunt and the cousin, still no one came forward. Later, DNA testing linked the victim to a family from Alabama, but again no one came forward, despite there also being a toddler involved. There's lots of things that could potentially identify this victim, but no one's ever come forward. She's never been identified, which is, as I say, quite shocking. But because of the tattoo of this peach on her back, she's known in the investigation as Peaches, or rather less intimately as Jane Doe number 3. The toddler is known as Baby Doe. One presumption is that the victim, Peaches, had a toddler with her when she met her killer. It's presumed she was a prostitute. There's no real evidence that she was, because no one knows who she is, so the killer killed the toddler because it was there at the same time, a sort of horrible form of collateral damage. The next victim was called Jacqueline Smith. She was just 16 and went missing in July 1999. Her torso was found on the 10th of June 2000 in plastic bags on Rockaway Beach, which is on the western end of Long Island. Now, the next victim after Jacqueline Smith was called Valerie Mack. She was a 24-year-old prostitute. She went missing in the summer, sometime in year 2000, in New Jersey. Her dismembered body or torso was found further east on Long Island, a place called Manorville, in some woods, some pine barrens, in November 2000. In 2011, 11 years later, her head and hands and a foot were found very close to where baby Doe had been left on in the Cedar Beach area on the south shore of Long Island. Then we have Andre Isaac, a gay drag artist or transvestite, aged 25, who went missing in late November 2002 and whose torso was found in December of that year near Rockaway Beach, that same Rockaway Beach where Jacqueline Smith had been, her body had been left. The head, this man's head, with a bullet hole in the temple, was found in a frozen pond, a place called Moriches, which is further east on Long Island. That was in January 2003. Moriches is close to Manorville, where the body of Valerie Mack had been left. Soon afterwards, the arms and legs were found also quite near where this frozen pond was in April 2004. Moriches is about 5.5 miles away from Manorville. The next victim was called Jessica Taylor, a 20-year-old prostitute who went missing on the 21st of July 2003, and her dismembered body, the head and hands were missing, was found 5 days later very close to where Valerie Mack's torso was found in the pine barrens in Manorville. In 2011, 8 years later, her skull and the remains of her hands were found near Cedar Beach, very close to where these other bodies were found. The remains of an unidentified Asian male, estimated to be between 17 and 23 years of age, were found in December 2010 between Cedar Beach and Gilgo Beach. The body had been badly decomposed, and his death can only be estimated to have taken place between the year 2000 and 2005. He died through severe blunt force trauma to his head and was wearing women's clothes, which suggests he may have been a transgender. As I said, he's never been identified. But I think it's significant that the two male victims were killed in a different manner to the female victims. A bullet to the head and blunt force trauma to the head. Then we come to Maureen Brainard-Barnes. She was 25 when she disappeared. She had been last seen on the 9th of July 2007. She was a prostitute, worked in New York via the Craigslist website. Her skeletal remains were found on Gilgo Beach on Long Island, and after her disappearance, her family members received taunting telephone calls. Then we have Tanya Rush, who's 39, quite a lot older than the rest. She was last seen on the 23rd of June 2008 and worked as a prostitute in New York. She was found 4 days later on a freeway ramp, a place called Belmore on Long Island. Next we have Melissa Barthélemy. She was a 24-year-old prostitute who also worked via Craigslist in New York. She disappeared on the 12th of July 2009, and like Maureen Brainard-Barnes, her cell phone was later used to make abusive phone calls to her family, and these calls were traced, interestingly, to Midtown Manhattan and to 3 locations on Long Island: Massapequa, Lindenhurst and Freeport. Her skeletal remains were found at Gilgo Beach on Long Island. Next we come to Shannon Gilbert, who was a 24-year-old prostitute who also worked via Craigslist. She was last heard of on the 1st of May 2010 at a location in Gilgo Beach. Shannon Gilbert is very significant to this whole case, and I'll refer back to her later on. Then we have Megan Waterman, a 22-year-old prostitute working via Craigslist in New York. She went missing on the 6th of June 2010. Her skeletal remains were found on Gilgo Beach on Long Island. The last victim that I'm going to deal with, Amber Lynn Costello, was a 27-year-old prostitute who also advertised via Craigslist. She went missing on the 2nd of September 2010. Her skeletal remains were found on Gilgo Beach. Amber Costello I'll be coming back to because she's very important in the case. The day before she disappeared, she was witnessed having an interaction with a large man who was described as an ogre with glasses and thick dark hair, and he drove a Chevrolet Avalanche. I'm going to come back to this, so please remember the Chevrolet Avalanche. 11 of these victims are regarded as the core Long Island serial killing victims, from which you could exclude Shannon Gilbert for reasons which I'm going to come on to, which would leave 10 that the police believed were linked. 4 of those are regarded as the Gilgo Beach killings, and they're also known as the Craigslist killings for obvious reasons. There are a further 2 unidentified murder victims that were found on the north side of Long Island that I haven't gone into, as they seem to me, when I've read about them, they seem to be too different and too distinct to be part of the series. As you might imagine, the investigation was highly complex, and as I said, the bodies were found years after the murders and not in chronological order, the chronological order in which they were murdered. The police investigation started after they received a 911 call from the south shore of Long Island in May 2010 from Shannon Gilbert, the one I mentioned earlier and said I was going to come back to. She claimed people were trying to kill her and then she disappeared. The police began searching the area and found nothing. Slowly they widened the area of their search, and in December 2010 a police cadaver dog was searching with its handler in some scrub and undergrowth next to the roadway called Ocean Parkway that runs along the beachfront of the south shore of Long Island in a place called Oak Beach. Over the course of several days, 4 bodies were found. None of them was Shannon. They were Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartholomew and Amber Costello, 4 of the ones I mentioned just now. They were 500 feet from each other and roughly 10 yards in the undergrowth off the road, as I say, that ran down the shore called Ocean Parkway. They were known as the Gilgo 4 or the Gilgo Beach serial killings after the area in which they were found. Shannon's skeletal remains were eventually found in December 2011, over a year and a half after she disappeared, and very close to the properties she was known to have interacted with and from where the various 911 calls were made on the night she disappeared, which is quite shocking from an investigative point of view. She had made these 911 calls after having an argument of some sort with a customer in the house, which was in a gated community called the Oak Beach Association. She was a prostitute, that was her client. He, incidentally, was cleared of any involvement. She knocked on various other doors in the Ocean Beach Association, and then she disappeared. The police deny that she is part of the case and believe that she got disorientated and lost in the marshy areas on the foreshore and accidentally drowned. The original autopsy lists her cause and manner of death as undetermined, noting that on the examination of her remains revealed no evidence of trauma. A celebrity forensic pathologist called Michael Barden re-examined the body in 2014 because it caused a big stir the police denying that she was a murder victim, and he found that there was evidence of bone damage in her neck which suggested strangulation. The police still don't think that Shannon Gilbert was murdered. However, the search for her body led to the discovery of many of the other victims. Now, the FBI became involved in 2015 after a guy called James Burke, who was the former head of Suffolk County Police Department, in whose jurisdiction the bodies had been found, had been arrested for assault of a suspect and obstruction of justice in a case that was unrelated to these murders. Prior to his arrest, Burke had resisted allowing the FBI to be involved in the investigation of the Gilgo Beach case because he knew they were investigating him for various things, including this assault. Now, the suspect that Burke assaulted, he did it because he knew this guy had broken into his car and stolen various items of pornography and sex toys from it, and Burke was probably embarrassed by this. Now, after this scandal came to public knowledge, a prostitute came forward and claimed that Burke had attended sex parties and had behaved in a violent manner. These factors made Burke a suspect for the Gilgo Beach murders in some people's eyes. Another local convicted killer called John Bittroff was also a prime suspect for the Long Island serial killings, or at least some of them, not least because he lived near Manorville, which I mentioned, where the pine barrens were. Two of the bodies were left, but no real progress has been made in investigating him. As I say, he's already in jail for some other murders. A new police team took charge of the case in January 2022 under the Suffolk County, the new Suffolk County District Attorney called Raymond Tierney. They reviewed the case and identified a possible suspect of March of that year, March 2022, against whom they quite skillfully, it must be said, assembled evidence which then eventually led to his arrest. We're going to go straight on now to look at the man who's been arrested for these crimes. If you like it so far, please subscribe, please like and comment below. We've got plenty more to come in this episode. Keep watching. The suspect is called Rex Heuermann, and he was arrested on the 13th of July 2023 outside his Midtown Manhattan workplace from this office at 385 5th Avenue in New York City. He ran his own business, an architectural firm called RH Consultants and Associates. It's in the shadow of the Empire State Building, quite a prestigious address, and RH is obviously for Rex Heuermann. It's quite a successful business. The police preferred to arrest him there, as apparently he had way over 200 legally owned firearms in his house, and some illegal ones, I believe, at 105 1st Avenue, Massapequa Park on Long Island, on the outer suburbs of New York City, significantly only a few miles away from Gilgo Beach. And I've mentioned Massapequa Park, I've mentioned Midtown Manhattan. After his arrest, Raymond Tierney, who's the Suffolk County District Attorney, has conducted himself very well, been very cautious in the statements he's made. This is in marked contrast to the police themselves in Suffolk County, who have been frankly grandstanding and saying things like that they've arrested a demon and a predator, which could potentially, certainly in the United Kingdom, could prejudice the case that they're going to make. Heuermann was married and doesn't seem to have previously come to the attention of the police for any offences. He married in 1996, so it wasn't a brief situation, and he adopted one of his previous wife's children, and they had another together. He'd actually been briefly married in the early 90s before this, and divorced, but So it doesn't seem that he was a weird loner who lacked all social graces. Indeed, he features in a number of work-related videos where he comes across as perfectly affable. There are against this, there are reports from neighbours and his old schoolmates from school, from years before, obviously, that he was a bit reclusive and odd. But when an arrest like this is made, in cases such as this, people frequently feel compelled to state that they always thought that this person there was something weird about the culprit, to conform to popular stereotypes of what serial killers are supposed to be like. So I'd take a lot of these claims with a slight pinch of salt. Strangely, Heuermann lived under 3 miles from the location of the Amityville horror, a fact which I think actually has some significance. Heuermann, who was 59, had lived in the area pretty much all his life. Indeed, the house he lived in at Massapequa Park had been previously owned by his parents. On November the 13th, 1974, when Heuermann would have been an impressionable 12-year-old, Ronald Defoe Jr. shot to death 6 members of his own family at 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville. The mass shooting shocked America and almost immediately passed into folklore, which was assisted when the Lutz family, the first family to move into 112 Ocean Avenue, the first people since the murders, fled the house quite a short time after they moved in January 1976. They'd just been there for 28 days, in fact, claiming that there'd been a whole series of supernatural happenings in the house. A book based on their claims was published in 1977 called The Amityville Horror, a true story, which sold over 10 million copies and led to a whole series of films that were released from 1979 onwards. It became a huge phenomenon. This must have influenced a young psychopath living such a short distance away. Heuermann's father died almost exactly a year after the Amityville murders, and he reportedly clashed with his father before his father's death. Ronald Defoe shot his father to death, don't forget, along with his other family members. Was this of significance to Heuermann? As a note of caution, Heuermann has not been found guilty yet. Indeed, he's already pleaded not guilty at an initial hearing, nor has he been charged with all the murders. So far, only 3, which is quite common in cases such as this. The police tend to go with the murders for which they have the most evidence, the soundest evidence. The 3 are Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman and Amber Costello, 3 of the Gilgo Beach 4. The 4th of the Gilgo Beach 4, they're also looking at and have announced that Miss brainard-barnes, they've announced that he's also under investigation. The filing states, moreover, there is substantial evidence of defendant Heuermann's involvement in the disappearance and death of Miss brainard-barnes, which evidence closely fits the modus operandi of the defendant in relation to the deaths of the other 3 women. As I said, these 4 victims were all found closely together. They were the first ones that were found in the first search by that cadaver dog on Gilgo Beach. They're all prostitutes. They all work via Craigslist. They're all petite and they're all strangled rather than dismembered and were left in burlap sacking. So it can be seen why, in the eyes of the police, these could be fitted together most easily. The evidence against Heuermann is mostly circumstantial. He came to the police's attention in March 2022 when, after reviewing their evidence, they ran checks on that Chevrolet Avalanche that I mentioned earlier, and they found that one was registered in Massapequa, the area where some of the calls on burner phones the abusive calls which I mentioned to family members. A burner phone, by the way, is a pay-as-you-go non-contract phone that the user can throw away after use. But they found that these calls had been made in quite a tight area, based on the phone masts, quite a tight area in Massapequa, where this car, one of the a Cherokee Avalanche, was registered. Cherokee Avalanches are relatively rare vehicles, and it was found that Heuermann had a green one, a dark one, and it was seen that it was a dark one which had been seen at the house earlier. And was seen by the witness. Now, tens of thousands of Chevrolet Avalanches are sold every year during that period, so it's hardly conclusive. But once Heuermann came under investigation and the rest of the evidence was accumulated, the fact that he lived near the body dumping sites, that he worked in an office by Midtown Manhattan of New York, the general area where most of the victims worked, and also where other calls had been made on burner phones and on the victims' phones for these nuisance calls. That tied Heuermann to Midtown Manhattan near his workplace, to where, let's face it, hundreds of thousands of people work in Midtown Manhattan, but he worked in Midtown Manhattan. The area around Massapequa Park was much smaller. He had a Cherokee Avalanche. This put him in the frame, and the case was built from there. On top of that circumstantial evidence, he was put under close observation and scrutiny. Incidentally, Heuermann's old Chevrolet Avalanche has been found and impounded and is being checked over. I believe he'd given it to his brother in 2015. It's important to note that, and this is damning for the police, the Cherokee Avalanche, the fact that it existed, had been in the police files for years, but the significance had been missed until a new set of eyes looked on the case after the sacking of the corrupt copper and the appointment of Tierney as the district attorney in Suffolk County. But once they had Heuermann in the frame, FBI analysts were able to compare all this data on the cell phones, the data from the anonymous burner phones that the culprit used to communicate with the victims. They could analyse the phone masts, as I said, and work out that it must have been Heuermann. 150,000 people, by the way, live in Long Island and commute to Manhattan every day. So that's a lot of people to narrow it down from. They also found that Heuermann's registered phone usage on the phone that was registered his own name mirrored the movements of these burner phones. It all matched. He even went on holiday with his wife to Iceland, and the burner phone messages ended when he went and started again when he came back. Investigators gathered evidence of Heuermann's internet search history, which included what has been described as torture porn and depictions of women being abused, raped and killed. Also child porn, and he also searched for photos of the Long Island serial killing victims, photos and pictures of the relatives of the victims. He did over 200 searches for information about the investigation into Long Island serial killings itself. Accumulating evidence about his background behaviour and things that influenced or interested him is clearly important. He went under false names when he registered for sites such as Tinder to find escorts for casual hookups, and to create distance between these false names were to create distance between his public self, the married architect, and the sexual predator. The court filing says a hair found on the burlap that wrapped one of the victims up was determined to be a potential DNA match to Heuermann, based on a DNA sample that was retrieved from a crust of a pizza box that he had discarded in a bin in Manhattan while under observation. This isn't conclusive of murder in itself, because the DNA on the victim had degraded, but it added to the circumstantial evidence. DNA testing was also carried out on a hair sample found at the crime scene and was matched, a close but not definitive match again, on a sample of Heuermann's wife's hair, which they found the sample to match this by secretly going through their garbage left outside his house. Heuermann's wife's hair at the crime scene must have been passed on by transfers, must have been stuck on his clothing or something and fell off. It doesn't imply that she was present at the time of the murders. Indeed, it's been established that whenever Heuermann committed these crimes, his wife and children were not even in New York State. They were off on holiday or something. Incidentally, his wife has filed a divorce. A belt inscribed HM or WH, depending on which way round it is, was found at one of the crime scenes. I believe it was wrapping up one of the victims to tie the victim up in this burlap, and it matches the initial supposedly of his father, but I think that's a red herring, because although perhaps his grandfather may have had the initial W, his father was called Theodore, so that doesn't match, but maybe his grandfather did. But I think this belt's a red herring. After his arrest, Heuermann's garden has been dug up and his house extensively searched. It was discovered that he had constructed a secure vault under his house, which may or may not have been used in connection to the murders. It may have just been used to secure his firearms collection. He also had a storage facility, a separate storage facility, which was, believe it or not, in Amityville. No information has as yet been provided with respect to what might or might not have been found in any of these searches. The police are keeping things quite close to their chest at the moment, and presuming there's a massive amount of evidence to go through. Incidentally, at least part of the reason Heuermann had a huge firearm collection was that he was an avid hunter, and there's some evidence that the two victims, Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor, that remember were found in the pine barrens at Manorville, were somehow tied up in a way that was reminiscent of the way a hunter would tie up its game that they'd killed. Remember, parts of those two victims are also found on the Cedar Beach area, a couple of miles up from Gilgo Beach. So we have these cases. Tina Foglia, 1st of February 1982, found at Gilgo Beach. Jane Doe, number 7, April 1996, found on Fire Island and Tobay Beach. Jane Doe, number 3, or Peaches, June 1997, found at Hempstead Lake State Park and Jones Beach, and also Baby Doe, June 1997, found at Cedar Beach. Then we move on to Jacqueline Smith, July 1999, found at Rockaway Beach. Valerie Mack, the summer of 2000, found at Manorville and Cedar Beach. Andre Isaac, killed in late November 2002, found Rockaway Beach on Mauritius. Jessica Taylor, 21st of July 2003, found at Manorville and Cedar Beach. Unidentified Asian male, between 2000 and 2005, found on Cedar Beach. Maureen Brainard-Barnes, 9th of July 2007, found on Gilgo Beach, one of the ones involved in the current case. Tanya Rush, 23rd of June 2008, found at Belmore. Melissa Barthélemy, 12th of July 2009, found at Gilgo Beach. Melissa Barthélemy is another one that Heuermann has been charged with her murder. Then we have Shannon Gilbert, 1st of May 2010, found on Gilgo Beach. The police don't think she's a victim of murder at all. Then we've got Megan Waterman, 6th of June 2010, found at Gilgo Beach. Lastly, Amber Lynn Costello, 2nd of September 2010, found at Gilgo Beach. I'll just mention that Toby Beach, where parts of one of the early unidentified victims was found, was apparently a favourite beach used by the kids at Heuermann's high school, where supposedly he was reportedly a bit of an uncool outcast. Also, one of Heuermann's identified Google searches was Asian twink tied up porn, which is a sexual perversion linked to effeminate Asian men, which links back to this unidentified Asian male whose body was found. The 4 victims that were named in the charges against Heuermann were all petite. This was contrasted with his own bulk. Did he select small victims deliberately? Bear in mind that he picked his victims off the internet rather than, for example, picking up streetwalkers where he could see them beforehand. So was the petite nature of these victims just a coincidence? He perhaps didn't know they were petite until he was with them. But Heuermann seems to have used the services of prostitutes frequently and only murdered occasionally. Indeed, his phone records show that he was still using the services of prostitutes up to the time of his apprehension. The murders tended to occur on roughly an annual basis. Of course, we don't know that he was responsible for all of these murders, nor do we know whether there are others that have yet to be found. And these have only been tentatively linked together. Or perhaps he only felt comfortable killing when his wife was away and had to wait for that to occur before committing crimes. Or did the victims have to be of a particular type before he contemplated killing them? You know, they're petite. We don't know. It's interesting that the final 2 murders took place just 4 months apart, and then they stopped. I think it is significant that the last murder, that of Amber Costello, was when Heuermann was allegedly seen by a witness with the victim and with his Chevrolet Avalanche. I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. On the 1st of September 2010, a customer went around to Amber Costello's house at West Babylon, which is quite close to where Heuermann lived on Long Island. The customer, who matched Heuermann's description — I gave a bit of a description of him earlier, this ogre with dark hair and glasses — paid her the money for services, but before anything could happen, one of Amber Costello's roommates appeared and pretended to be her outraged boyfriend. And the customer, this got big ogre guy with dark hair and glasses, fled the scene, having been scammed out of his money. However, this customer, on a burner phone, texted Amber Costello back saying that he wanted credit for next time. Now, she was murdered the next day. Could it be that Heuermann didn't originally intend to kill Costello, and it was just a punt that went wrong, but he was then angered or annoyed by what happened, so went back even though he'd been seen, and was because of his anger he got careless? Even though he and his car was seen, he got careless. Did he stop because he realised he'd made that sloppy mistake? I think there might be something in that. Now, there are also 4 similar murders in Atlantic City, New Jersey in 2006, and these are being looked into. It is, of course, sensible for the police to look at a range of unsolved murders to see if they may be part of this whole sequence. And notice there were no Long Island cases in 2006. Other locations to which Heuermann is connected: a timeshare condominium in Las Vegas, an undeveloped land in South Carolina where his brother lives, are also being checked to see if there are similar cold cases. Although I found that the land in Chester, South Carolina, was only bought in 2021. So it seems to me that in that case, the investigation is unlikely to bear fruit. I've gone through the case about the Long Island serial killer. I could have gone on and on for ages, every little detail. But I hope you've picked up on a number of issues in connection that cross over to the Jack the Ripper case, particularly the case against Charles Lechmere. Comment below and tell me what crossovers you see, or whether you completely disagree with me on this. The next episode will be about those crossovers, where I will list them, go through them all. Let's see if you agree with my analysis. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, share, like and comment. Thank you very much.